Hello, everyone. Welcome to Sitheads Meditation Club. My name is John. I help organize this group. Sitheads is a sitting and social group for people interested in deep meditation practice. I like to call us a serious meditation group for non-serious people. Everything we do is free and donation based. And if you want to hang out with us, you can find us at sit-heads.com. Um, I'm going to go ahead and bring you up, Kim, to join me. Hi, Kim. How are you?
I'm great. Very good to see you, John, and the group here.
Glad to be here with you. So, do you mind if I do like a quick third person introduction of you? Can sort of feel a little weird. Is that all right?
Sure, I hear these all the time.
Fair enough. So Kim Allen has been meditating since 2003. Um, Her primary teacher is Gil Fronsdal, but she's also studied with Shaila Catherine, Bhikkhu Analayo, Bhikkhu Bodhi, I think in particular studying the Buddhist suttas or the words of the Buddha as recorded by the early Buddhist texts. Um, Kim has done over 1,000 days, that is nearly 3 years of silent retreat, up to months at a time. She has been on retreat in Sri Lanka and visited Buddhist temples and centers in 6 other Asian countries. Kim was asked to begin teaching at the Insight Meditation Center in Northern California, founded by Gil Fronsdal, and she now teaches all over the place in the US, internationally, and online. She is fully authorized as both a Dharma teacher and a Buddhist minister through the Insight Meditation Center. She is also the author of the book Full Simplicity: The Art of Renunciation and Letting Go, a book that was profoundly influential on me. I absolutely love that book. So, Kim, I'm really glad to have you here with us. So, I consider this just such a privilege to get to talk to you as the author of one of my favorite spiritual books, Full Simplicity: The Art of Renunciation and Letting Go. I am one of those people who got really into Buddhism, read about concentration, read about insight, read about awakening, liked all that stuff, read about love and compassion, liked all that stuff, read about craving and how it's bad and said, yeah, I agree. And then read about renunciation and said, oh, no, thank you, actually. I'll take everything else, please. And it was a long and slow period of process of deconditioning that is still not done. Um, and your book played a pivotal role there. Just talk to me about this idea that, renunciation is sort of the part of Buddhism that people always want to sort of, they want to eat around that part, all the other good stuff, you know? So what would you say to those people? What are they missing?
Well, the first thing to say is that the Pali word is not renunciation, of course. That's an English translation. And the Pali word is nekkhamma, which is actually a very rich and multifaceted word that is very difficult to translate into English. We don't have just one word that really works. Renunciation, if you have to pick one word, okay, maybe that speaks to um, kind of the heart of it, which is to release or let go or turn away from. It actually literally means something like turn away from. Um, but then we have to ask all sorts of questions like turn away from what? And if it's greed, hatred, and delusion, which is one of the meanings of nekkhamma, that would be, of course, turning toward the path, toward awakening, toward love, toward compassion, toward jhana, all those things that you liked. Um, so that's maybe one response is that we have to be careful that we look more carefully at the fullness of the word, which is why I wrote a whole book on it, because I felt like there
Yeah.
was often a little bit of one dimensionality there. But maybe another interesting reason that people have difficulty with renunciation or how we can understand that is that the Buddha himself in the Pali discourses says that he had difficulty with renunciation before his
Yeah.
awakening. You
His
know,
heart did
he
not leap up at it.
he did not leap up at it. He felt like, oh, this is not what I Somehow my heart is not, into this. And the inquiry that he did about, why is it that not the case? And he realized succinctly that he had not seen the benefits of it. He hadn't really looked carefully at all the advantages that come from whatever this thing nekkhamma is, complex.
Mm.
And when he did, then he could see more clearly. But the mind is blinded. It's not a personal failing that we don't like renunciation. That's why we're not awake.
Yeah. And I think that's something that comes up. Like, I think when you talk about how it's really turning away from greed, hatred, and delusion, I think that when people hear renunciation, what they imagine is it means I have to give up all the stuff I like.
Right,
There's a sense, I think there's a sense of almost having your arm twisted, like having to do, like, okay, if I want to do Buddhism, I'm being, it's twisting my arm. I have to do this other stuff. I want to, I have to get rid of all the good stuff. But I think that there's a, like, when I hear it talked about, like, your book is called Full Simplicity. And I think when you talk about simplicity, I think people do not find that so disconcerting. People understand the beauty of simplicity, especially in a world that is so complex and so riddled with constant stimulation. I think people have come to understand, like, the idea of going to a place, perhaps an external place, where there isn't so much stimulation. You're by a lake, it's
right,
calm, it's quiet. No one looks at that and says, "Oh, you're taking away all my stuff." Right? Or that's life denying or something. People sense the wholesomeness in that. And I feel like as I read your book, I feel like the character at the heart of renunciation is the same character of not saying we're coming to take all your stuff, but coming to say, wouldn't it be nice to not need so much stuff? Wouldn't it be nice to
mm,
not be so dependent on all this stuff? Yeah, there's a taste of its essence is freedom, right? It's not, and I think that's where things go wrong because when you hear renunciation, you almost feel um like compulsion, like having to, yeah, like obligation in a sense, like it's being imposed on you.
well, that word compulsion is interesting in that compulsion is one of the reasonable translations of tanha, the cause of
Mm,
suffering. And we have a lot of compulsions in our life toward getting stuff, being something, being seen a certain way. Um, these are uh, this is one of the things that leads toward dukkha, toward suffering. So I noticed that renunciation, when we use that word, because of its associations in English, and this is somewhat related to what you you went through in your view of how people might, your enactment of how somebody might relate to that term, is that it's often
yeah,
framed in the
somebody.
material. Somebody, yeah, somebody in the past, maybe. So it's framed in terms of the material, right? It's like, oh, I have to get rid of my stuff, or I won't be
Hmm.
able to have the things that I enjoy.
Yeah.
My warm bed and my the clothes I enjoy, and living in the city that I do, and all these things. But the material forms of renunciation actually don't go all the way to freedom.
Hmm.
They're not deep enough to go all the way to awakening. We need to renounce, or let's say let go of, release mental habits of suffering that are really much more tenacious, actually, and also harder to see in some ways. You could live in a very beautiful place if you have no attachment to it. That would be fine. But that attachment, working on that, um, will take us much more deeply in. Even when I find this with people, is that I give them the exercise. I talk about this in the book of cleaning out their closet, and people are like, "Oh yeah, all right, I can clean out my closet. There's a bunch of stuff in there I haven't used for 10 years." Um, and then they discover that, yeah, there's some things that it's easy to just say, okay, yeah, I can give these away, or my friend would like this, or whatever. But then they run into all these mental habits like, oh, I'm not sure I want to get rid of this because I might need it someday. I haven't used it for
Mm,
3 years, but there's a view in there somehow of I got to save stuff because it might be useful. And that's sometimes useful, but it's sometimes not, right?
yeah.
So, have we looked carefully at how our mind is relating to these things? And so, looking at material renunciation and actually trying to do it leads us to something much more interesting, which is what is our mind obsessed with? What does it value? What does it care about? What is it unwilling to sacrifice in order that and that's what starts coming in that I can look a certain way, be a certain way, etc.
Mm, yeah. I think something that comes up, um, well, you talk about habits of mind, right? Um, and the grasping or the compulsion is a habit, but what about and it has a certain momentum. So how do you reckon with the fact that, or maybe not, let me not say the fact, but the observation that I've had, at least in my own experience, and that I've heard from others, that practicing renunciation, which in practice often does involve your relation to various types of stuff. Not because that's the thing that you need to give up, but that's because that's what your craving is pointing towards. You're
It's in the
craving for
mind.
various
Yeah.
stuff, right? Um, my experience has been that if when you're really ensnared in your habits of seeking fulfillment from the gratification of cravings of various kinds, that to let go of that is, depending on your situation, is not always immediately freeing. It is not always immediately uh, satisfying or enjoyable. Or there's sometimes it's quite painful because you're an addict in a sense, and now
No
you're
one
going
said the path
without.
didn't have pain.
Well, but I don't like it.
Right,
No,
right.
I'm kidding there, but you know, there is like, would you say that's right that there can't like it's interesting. I've noticed that when you go on retreat, when I go on retreat, the relief is almost immediate. And it's because I'm separated from the objects of my craving. I couldn't get them if I wanted to. My phone, all the BS of my life, not that my whole life is BS, a lot of my life is great, but the BS parts, I'm they're not even accessible to me. So I immediately feel free. My phone is not available to me, so I don't even want to check it. I just go, ah. But in the world, when I try and say, okay, I'm gonna not really look at my phone this evening. I'm gonna meditate. I'll quietly prepare my meal. I want it. It's unpleasant. It's how do you make it through that? How do you get to the
Hmm.
other side of that?
Yeah,
Or do
this
you
is an
never get to the other
interesting
side of that?
this is an interesting question, right? So sometimes the complete separation from things is easier or cleaner than having to be mindful and exercise some care and restraint.
Yeah,
Maybe it takes
yeah.
a little bit more maturity or practice to be able to do the second one. Uh, this is a good point and something that we can observe about certain things in our lives. So here, I think it's helpful to look at the notion of trading up in happiness, which is also, a form of what renunciation is about. So there's a wonderful verse in the Dhammapada that says, if by letting go of a lesser happiness one could experience greater happiness, a wise person would renounce the lesser to behold the greater. So your phone is a certain kind of happiness. We don't have to deny that. Good stuff comes through the phone. It connects us to people. Etc. I have a phone. I think it's great. I would not want to live without a phone. That would be very hard in this world. And yet, I know that the happiness that comes from that phone, quote unquote, is much less than, say, meditating. So that's very clear in my mind. But unless one has enough wisdom, right? The third line of that was a wise person would renounce the lesser to behold the greater. We may not yet have
Mm,
enough wisdom, enough clarity about what is actually wholesome and unwholesome in order to make the right choice in a given
yeah.
situation. So then it becomes a practice. try it out. So very mindfully start using the phone. And maybe the first 5 minutes are really actually quite beneficial. We feel happy. We check something off of our to-do list by sending a message we needed to. We look something up that's useful. And then starting on the 6th minute, we begin checking the news and then doom scrolling or something like this. And we notice, if we have mindfulness, we notice, oh, my mind has gone down a pathway where it's starting to become more unwholesome instead of more wholesome through using it. And so then we can make the wiser choice to turn to an activity that will help support wholesomeness in the mind.
Mm.
But it takes a little
Yeah.
trial and error and some clarity.
Yeah. So I think I've heard this especially from Thai forest monks, Western, like Thai forest monks, like Ajahn Suchito, who I recently did a retreat with. The idea that you almost need wholesome food to replace the unwholesome food before you're ready to almost not snack at all, right? Like
Mhm.
Thanissaro Bhikkhu talks about it this way too. The mind is always seeking food, and that you ultimately want to stop snacking, right? You don't need that. But that before you can make it to just you need to it's skillful to replace the unwholesome food with wholesome food and by that I think they mean things like loving kindness and wholesome the cultivation of wholesome qualities, and I think they also mean uh samadhi and jhana there as
Yeah,
well, like sort of what the so-called unworldly pleasures or happiness
yeah.
is.
This
What
is
do you
all
think
part
about
of
that
the,
as a perspective? Is that a
absolutely. This is,
digression? Is it an easy way out? Is it just like, hey, just, you know, do your
well,
renunciation. You don't need to snack on anything.
Well, I think this is the trading up, right? So we started thinking that the junk food was what we wanted, and then we go to the more wholesome food of cultivating the mind, understanding what's skillful and unskillful, loving kindness, ethics, meditation, various
Mm,
meditation states. All of these are great. And as the mind becomes more and more refined and is snacking, let's say, on better and better food, it actually increases its chances that it will be able to see where the end of suffering is and let go.
mm,
I mean, it has multiple benefits, not only beneficial in the moment in terms of healing, nourishment, ease, peace, all the good feelings that come right in the moment from these higher forms of happiness, but even better, they incline the mind toward being able to go all the way to not needing the snack at all, which is a
yeah,
maybe far away for some of us. Um, you know, so I think this is a fine progression to be thinking about in the mind.
yeah. And you do actually note that in your book, right? Which I should have noted that you do the book certainly lays out a place for not just renunciation and letting go, but cultivation of the wholesome or turning yourself away from unwholesome uh yeah, pleasures toward more wholesome pleasures, which then lead, yeah, you describe them, I think, as onward leading, essentially.
Yeah, onward leading. Maybe it's important to note, though, because some people would say, well, hearing this, why didn't the Buddha only teach that path? Why didn't he just teach us to follow our higher and higher pleasures until we become free? And for some people, that path works fine. Um, but remember that there are four noble truths. There's the truth of dukkha, the truth of craving being the source of it, and then the cessation and the path. And so the question is, it's kind of a little bit, why didn't we just go for the pleasant parts of the path? Well, there's still also the need to do all four noble truths. We do have to understand dukkha in order to be able to fully release it. There are some cases where we'll need to look very carefully at dukkha itself, at suffering itself. And that means getting close to it. That means touching it. That means feeling the pain of various things that come up in the mind where it's grasping. And so the path is not meant to be a path of bliss, but neither is it a path of pain. So there are these two different routes, and you see that the Buddha sometimes taught people by saying, "Hey, you need to just stop doing that. You need to let go of that one. That's dukkha for you. Feel the pain of it." And then there were other ones where he said, "Oh, cultivate love, cultivate jhana. You need to move toward these higher mind states." And different people need different messages at different times.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah.
within the realm of letting go, uh, I think all of it is there.
Well, and at the same time, the Buddha did say, right, that his path is good in the beginning and the middle and the end, right? So how do we square the like for instance, as someone who did a lot of sort of Mahasi practice, there are parts of that path for some people. And Mahasi himself sort of warns you that there are parts of this that will be actually pretty tough. The so-called knowledges of fear, misery, disgust, desire for deliverance, etc. Um, how do we square the idea that like, hey, some of this is just going to be um, rough uh, with this idea of it's good in the beginning, it's good in the middle, it's good in the end, and certain folks who would look at the suttas and say, well, actually, the Buddha basically said everyone should practice jhana and sort of get kind of groovy and and then uh, explore insight from that place.
Well, first of all, the word that you're translating as good is kalyana, which technically
Mm.
means, it could mean good, can mean wise in terms of friends, but another meaning of it is beautiful. So it's
Mm.
beautiful in the beginning, beautiful in the middle, and beautiful in the end, referring to
Mm.
beautiful mind states. And one of the beautiful mind states is mindfulness,
Yeah.
being able to simply be with things. And sometimes what we're being with a very beautiful, wholesome, mindful mind, is something that's very painful. That's going to happen along the path. Because of something you said earlier, we're addicts. We're not willing to give up that identity, and it really can be a big fight in the mind. However, the connection to the cultivation of these very deep states of well-being is actually that if we have a mind that is deep into well-being, we are better positioned to understand dukkha. We
Yeah.
are better able to handle looking at very, very difficult dukkha states if the mind is concentrated. In fact, the more concentration you have, the more dukkha you're going to get because it's available. Well, maybe that's a little bit too strong, but we can find on retreat that when the mind gets very, very centered, balanced, samadhi, beautiful well-being and peace, that's often when something in the heart will present itself that is actually
Mm.
quite knotted up. And we see, look at that. And we have the fortitude, the resilience, the balance of mind to just say, wow, it's not me, not mine. I can look at that knot. Maybe we
Mm.
have a chance of disentangling it. Whereas if we didn't have that much well being, we were in our ordinary, agitated, aversive, greedy kind of state, there's no way we could touch that. It would just be too
Yeah.
painful. So
Yeah.
to go really
Yeah.
deep into dukkha, I think we need the well-being.
Yes. And the well-being, you're talking now about the well-being that comes from samadhi specifically.
Mhm. Yeah, not
Um,
necessarily jhana. Samadhi is broader than
right.
that, but yeah, the kind of well-being that can come through meditation, through
Hmm.
seclusion of the mind from the hindrances, and yeah.
Would you say that I mean, does it follow from that renunciation practice of the type that you advocate for in your book is not really viable without a firm base in samadhi, or would you not go that far?
The renunciation practice I talk about in the book spans the entire length of the path. So it starts with a renunciation that is associated with ethics, with giving up things that are unwholesome.
Mm,
Should be an easy one, but even that can be hard sometimes. And then renunciation can also be applied to giving up the five hindrances, being willing to not be fascinated with the stuff that our mind is presenting us with and hooking us on. If we can not go with that, the mind will enter samadhi. And then there is the deeper letting go that's not no longer really called nekkhamma anymore, but I try to extend it a little bit in the book and connect it in. It's a different, deeper form of letting go that becomes non-volitional. When the mind sees the dukkha clearly enough, it sees where the grasping is initiated, it has a chance of letting go. And that's really the only way to get all the way to the roots of suffering.
yeah, that makes sense. So it deepens with your practice, essentially. There's always a
Yeah.
form of renunciation that you could be practicing at every stage of the path.
I think so.
Um,
I think it spans the whole path. And it's interestingly in the text, it even says that someone who is actually already awakened, who is an arahant, still carries the value of renunciation in their heart. They
mm,
still consider it important, even though technically they wouldn't really need to be doing it anymore.
mm, yeah. Or they can't, in a sense, they almost can't not do it, right?
That's right. It's become incorporated into their being that they can't stick on anything. Things that come in will not land, will not catch and cause dukkha for them.
yeah. Because I said earlier, like just a moment ago, oh yeah, you can always practice renunciation at every stage of the path, but that separates renunciation from the path in a way that maybe isn't, it's so much more integrated. The way that you describe it, it's the essence, practicing your ethics, your sila is essentially a renunciative practice, right? And developing your samadhi and overcoming the hindrances, you're sort of renouncing this addiction to the hindrances. And so it's like renunciation is the path, in a sense, is what I'm
Yeah,
hearing.
it's two sides of the hand, right? There's the what we're letting go of, and then there's what we're cultivating or letting go into, what's developing. And you can see it one way or you can see it the other way.
Yeah, yeah. So I want to talk briefly about so I've sometimes heard from folks who practice or even teach in other traditions, like for instance, a Dzogchen tradition. Um, I sometimes get a perspective. We talked about this earlier when we were talking privately. I sometimes hear this idea that renunciation is um, sort of a lesser practice. It's that these non-dual perspectives are sort of higher. They've gone beyond such thinking as renunciation. Renunciation is rejecting certain things and accepting other things. It's dualistic. That it's something to transcend, and that a
Mm,
wiser perspective, a deeper perspective, would be beyond uh, such things, that it's Hinayana, right? It's lesser vehicle. Um, and it's almost like it struck me as in some ways almost a supremacist approach. Like sometimes they'll take pains to say, we're not saying that one is better than the other, but they sort of are. Um, I'm just curious, have you encountered that sort of perspective, and what do you think about it? How would you answer it?
well, I mean, we can go back to the quote by Padmasambhava. It says, though the view should be as vast as the sky, keep your conduct as fine as barley flour.
Mm,
So this refers to, on the one hand, we have a mind of emptiness that's very broad and vast, but it doesn't excuse one from the law of karma, from behaving in line with what is non-harming. The job of a bodhisattva is to um, act with no harm in the world in order to save all beings. So there is this notion, even in the later traditions, that choosing non harming as a way of being, compassion, we could also say in the positive form, is critical. I think there may also be sometimes confusion among the of the subtlety of the terms that are being thrown around. So the term non-dual, not only does that have a number of different meanings, and so if somebody were to bring that up, I would want to ask them, well, which non-duality are you talking about? Because there are
Hmm.
several that are identified in Buddhist teachings. But maybe we could just take the notion that if duality is the wrong way and non-duality is the right way, is that not a duality? Yeah, so non duality is much more subtle than people think.
Yeah.
It, in fact, should include duality within it in order not
Right.
to be creating any duality. So then it's a matter of when is duality useful and when is it not. And
Yeah,
that's a
well put.
discernment to be made on the path.
Yeah, it's a real MC Escher painting, isn't it? Non-duality, because you keep like to even talk about it or to say that this is, yeah, exactly as you said. Um, I also think that sometimes there's that subtle confusion that comes up in those when people are speaking that way between um, renouncing um, renouncing stuff, right? Versus renouncing things like grasping, uh, clinging, uh,
Absolutely. Yeah.
yeah,
Joseph Goldstein has been pointing out ever since he wrote his book One Dharma, and even he's come back to this theme again recently, is that there's no Buddhist tradition that says cling. And
yeah,
non-clinging
right.
is common to all the Buddhist traditions. So if renunciation includes the release of our tendency to grasp or be compelled or be attached to things in unhealthy ways, then of course that would be part of any practice toward
Mm.
freedom.
Yeah. And I think also when you hear, like, I'm no Dzogchen expert, I'm really no anything expert, but when you hear the great teachers in that lineage teach, you hear a lot of talk about spaciousness, openness. There seems to be non-clinging seems to be at the very root of it. It's like they're describing a mind that isn't contracted around things.
Right.
Um, and that seems completely compatible with, and perhaps even just another expression of the same idea that's being talked about, at least as part of the complex of ideas that inform this term of nekkhamma, of
Yeah, I think it's
renunciation.
quite compatible when
Mm.
viewed in that way.
Yeah. I also had a friend of mine who practices in more non-dual traditions who sent me something from, let me see if I can find it. It was from Lama Yeshe, the great Tibetan master from the Gelug school. Um, and yeah, he said, trying to squeeze pleasure out of things in this way is completely deluded. And as long as we have such an unrealistic attitude, we will never know true satisfaction. He's talking about Tantra here. If we do not let go of this grasping attitude, we will unintentionally turn Tantra into yet another meaningless journey around in circles. So, and then goes on to say, first of all, we need to develop a certain amount of renunciation. Because renunciation is often confused with the fearful, rejecting state of mind I criticized, I should start by describing what renunciation is. And he said it is not the same of giving, not the same as giving up pleasure or denying ourselves happiness. It means giving up our unreal expectations about ordinary pleasures. Um, there's nothing wrong with pleasure. It is our grasping, exaggerating, diluting, and distorting and polluting attitude toward pleasure, which must be abandoned. Um, so that, that is from deep in the heart of the Tibetan tradition.
It
And I
sounds
find
similar.
that,
Yeah.
yeah, um,
Yeah.
I find that heartening
Renunciation,
to see that we're not all so far apart from one another, you know?
exactly. Renunciation is very much associated with wisdom and clarity and seeing things realistically.
Yeah. So before we turn to Q&A, which we'll do shortly, there were a couple other things that you said you were interested in talking about, and I'm interested in hearing about. So, and they're related to this topic of renunciation, which has its connotations of simplicity, of letting go. You said you wanted to talk about what it means to sort of slow down and be simple in a world like the one that we live in today, where our attention is essentially being harvested, right? So yeah, I'm just curious to hear. You wanted to talk about that. So how do you see, um, what do you see as our best hope, our best chance, and how does the nature of this world, this attention economy, how should it shape, influence, or inform the way that we practice and the way that we think about simplicity, letting go,
Hmm.
renunciation?
Yeah, this is such a rich topic because there's so much suffering right now around the speed of life and the attachment to devices and the um, really just the ongoing, the sort of always on 24/7, which seems to just be accelerating. People said the same thing, I don't know, 20 or 30 years ago, but boy, we didn't know the scale it would get to now, right?
Yeah,
And in many ways, it's not that there isn't any way to use technology skillfully. Of course, there is. So the dukkha that comes from technology, it can be very hard to put down since we have this sense of needing to be there. Sometimes an
thanks.
analogy I like to give is that we think about art as an endeavor that people do. So some people do painting or music or um, pottery or something like that. And in order to really become skilled in that, there's a sort of an immersion that has to take place. If you want to learn to even something that'll be fun and social, like playing the guitar with your friends. You have to spend a little time learning the chords and all of that. And even more, if you really get into it and it becomes a serious, almost spiritual practice, then it becomes something where you set up a studio in your backyard and you're spending a lot of time there. So people can understand a pursuit like this. And if I say, well, what if meditation played that role in your life? You
Mm,
can do 5 minutes on an app and it's better than not. And it's a great way in for some people. But there can be a way that spiritual practice and meditation in particular um, become something that we really want to devote a lot of time to. That's a form of renunciation. If you spend an hour learning chords on the guitar, you didn't spend that hour doing something else,
yeah,
whether it was, any of those fun things that you think renunciation is about having to get rid of, right?
yeah.
So there is, I mean, to even in our understanding of how we live more conventional lives, some people have chosen things that really demand a kind of focus and an immersion and a whole beingness. And we respect those, actually. Those are things that we really uh, admire. People who have the fortitude and talent and ability to immerse themselves in. Why not the same with spiritual practice and meditation? If that is really calling to the heart, it's easy to give up a social hour in order to meditate or to learn the texts or to go on a retreat. You give up 3 or 4 days of work maybe to do that. So this is, I
Mm,
think, become a similar kind of feeling in our being. We're cultivating something, we're developing something, we're making a relationship between our whole being with this practice that is shaping us. And that's a very different mode than getting things done, knocking things off our list, consuming as we do from our media and our devices. Does
mm.
that resonate for you somehow? Can you get
It
into
ab
that? Yeah,
It absolutely does. I mean, to me, it's a sort of blessing and a burden to take up meditation as your craft in a sense, the way that one might take up pottery or guitar. On the one hand, we're blessed because unlike practicing the violin, you can practice all the time. You could be cultivating mindfulness,
good point.
discernment, samadhi, if you want to be a world-class violinist, you have to spend hours and even then, even the very best, You can't do it all day. We actually have a craft that we practice that you could never stop practicing if you really chose to. But it also at the same time means that um in a sense, every time that you are getting ensnared or ensnarled in all this distraction and so forth, you're sort of anti-practicing in a way, right? When you put down your violin, you're just not, you're done. You're not, you do your practice and then you're done. But you're molding your mind every moment, right? You're creating your karma every moment. And in this, because you talked about, well, yeah, it's not that hard to give up an hour. It's not that hard to give up a couple of days. But the truth is that really it's all practice time, right? The time that you're doom scrolling on your phone, that's relevant to your practice, right?
This is true if you can be mindful through it and notice how it increases agitation in the mind, for example, that potentially we're cultivating wisdom through that.
Hmm, indeed. That's a nice way to put it. That's a less that's a less nihilistic or negative and black-pilled way of looking at it, because I was like, well, it's hard because you're never off the clock in a sense. You put your violin down, you're off the clock. If meditation is your craft, you're kind of never off the clock. But your point is that even in the midst of distraction or agitation, there's an opportunity for wisdom there. Yeah. I don't want to monopolize your time anymore. I want to open it up to Q&A if folks here have questions. Here's how we're going to do it, everybody. And thank you so much for that wonderful conversation, Kim. I really enjoyed it. And it really is so cool to be able to talk to someone who wrote a book that I love so much. So thank you. It's
Thank you,
fun.
John. Your questions are excellent, and I hope they stimulate some other conversation too.
I appreciate it. And let's start our Q&A. I'll bring myself down. Hey, Vladimir, do you want to ask your question?
Sure. Thank you, Tim, for being here with us. So you mentioned something in passing that I found interesting, which was that renunciation becomes non-volitional at some point. And that I'm kind of my deeper question about the selfless perspective and in its, kind of ultimate place in the, mindful living, whether it is possible to live from that, or is it, like one of the mechanics, you either shut up or calculate or actually think about it through and end up with a many worlds hypothesis that you live with. So kind of like from a selfless perspective, uh, can one live from the third person in a way? And because volition becomes illusory, perhaps, when self is seen through. Anyway, so anything you can, whatever that
Thank
generates.
you. Thank you for the question. This is, and I appreciate this is an area where it's hard to speak clearly because although your question was clear, but just because we have language that reinforces agency and self and doing and creating. So this says something interesting about our brains, I think. But can one live from a place of a selfless perspective? I think that's the prospect of the path that the Buddha says it's possible to release this entirely, our obsession with this. However, you notice if you've read the text, the Buddha has no problem using the word I and me and my. And he even has autobiographical texts that say, when I was just an unawakened bodhisattva, I thought in this way. And then I went through these practices and my mind had these insights. So we have to be careful that the idea of not self or selflessness is somehow going to be a negation of all of that, or a forgetting of it, or that we can't connect with it, or something. Um, it just becomes something that is no longer grasped at any level in any way. And we can have little tastes of this, actually, long before the mind is fully awake. Um, Sometimes they're big experiences that people have as spiritual experiences, and then they spend decades, looking for how to reconnect with that. But even in a very ordinary way, for example, at this moment, you're hearing my voice. Could it just be hearing and not relate at all to Vladimir's long history of however you grew up and now that you're doing practice and now you're on the Zoom? But you just hear these sounds and you know what they mean. And it's just happening. Sound is happening, sound is being heard. So that's a very small taste of kind of a third person or no person perspective that we can actually cultivate in some deliberate ways. We can incline our mind toward this instruction of just this in the seeing, just the seeing, in the heard, just the heard, even in the thought, just the thought, these kinds of things. Um, or we can, as I mentioned a little more detail in the book, we just keep doing the practices that were laid out, practices like mindfulness of breathing, like some various samadhi practices. And the mind, when it sees any form of dukkha, starts to find a way to let go of it. Eventually, it will let go of its clinging to the notion of agency.
Yeah.
But luckily, we don't have to do that because how could we, through our agency, let go of agency? So it's more a matter of trust, of allowing that to unfold and trusting the process of releasing grasping and stickiness in the mind. Does that help?
Yeah, I mean, it's a question sort of I can see what you're saying, and experience it. It's sort of like the question is more like, do we need to switch back and forth other than when we need to communicate? Like, do we, is the first person perspective at some point does that become completely irrelevant because it's just not veridical? Because,
I'm
so
not sure because I'm not completely awake, but I think the free mind would take whatever perspective is most skillful at that moment. And if for some reason a first person perspective was uh, the most wise, the most compassionate way to be, the mind would seamlessly take
okay.
that on and then let it go instantly with no sense of, yeah, that's the real me or something like that. Um, I think the Buddha's mind was flexible enough to take any perspective that was needed.
Thanks, Vladimir. Thank you, Kim. Chappelle and Monica, would you like to ask your question, whichever one of you it is?
Thanks, John. Hey,
Yeah,
Kim.
and
Hi,
thank you,
Chappelle. Good
Chappelle,
to see
for
you again.
thank you for introducing me to Kim's work in the first place.
Oh, really? Yeah. No
Yeah,
problem.
you suggested the book. You're the reason this is happening. You're the reason she's here.
Sick. Well, yeah, it's great seeing you again, Kim. And yeah, my question's um about information and renunciation. Like, how do you balance those two um in your life?
Information and renunciation.
Like taking
It's
in
interesting.
information. Yeah.
Taking in information. Can you give an example of that's a little bit sticky for you, where that brought up a question like this?
For me, yeah, the climate change
Mhm.
news and some political news, local
Yeah.
news, uh,
Yeah.
looking up shows to go to.
Okay. Yeah. So there's um, maybe one way to approach, the taking in of information, which is normal, natural, something that we need to do in the world, is the kind of the bottom line of wisdom, which is what I'm doing right now, helping my mind to retain or move toward wholesome states, or is it helping it to retain and move toward unwholesome states in some way, where wholesome could mean anything from mindfulness, simple mindfulness, to wisdom or love or something else. So, and unwholesome is anything like agitation or depression or anger or grasping, something like that. So the trick is to notice what the effect is of taking in this information. Is it really serving my values at some level? And that doesn't mean that we would never read anything that was disturbing or, some of the hard facts about the climate that are going on right now, or various political arguments that we might need to take in order to inform our vote, something like that. It doesn't mean you never do that, but there should be enough mindfulness that we can stay with the process of that. And if it starts turning into a compulsion to click the next one, or if it starts turning into self-righteous anger about, this is terrible, and we go off into an opinion about this is why, then we have to recognize, oh, my mind is starting to wander into unhelpful territory. Maybe I should take a break or redirect in some way. And if we find that you don't look too happy with that answer, by the way. So let me ask you, is there more, or,
Yeah.
because that's kind of the basic answer, but there could be something more subtle going on.
No, I feel like literally the time and attention I devote to doing it is taking time out of cultivating like wholesomeness for sure.
Yeah.
I guess I have trouble. Yeah, it's just maybe it's not even finding a balance, but finding more value, like you said, in meditation versus, like feeling like no, I'm doing something good for knowing and caring about, I guess you could say, being against evil, essentially, like evil, like just making the world worse. And it's like, paying witness to that. It's like, yeah, it feels necessary to do, but I feel like it's taking time. It just takes time, and
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, and bearing witness is a form of compassion, so it's not that that's automatically bad, but I can hear now, you see this is where the trade-off is coming from. It's taking time from other things that you value. So that's a matter of making choices. Maybe you could be more efficient in how you scroll through the information. And you don't need to do 20 minutes, you could do 15 minutes. Or maybe there's a website where the articles that you read get you to what you need to know sooner, or something like that. Or maybe you just don't need to be as informed as you think you do. Your life would go on. What identity is it supporting to um, be informed about all these things? Sometimes there's a sense of, I need to be a certain kind of person. There's maybe some investigation to be done. We do live in a world of information overload, and so this is an area of particular practice. Your question is very, very relevant, and I'm sure it's relevant for others here also. And it's not easy. Sometimes there's too many good things we could be doing.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks, Chappelle. Thank you, Kim. Do we have any other questions?
Monica
Self-up, so I
also
can.
had something.
Yeah, she sent another thing, so I'll go there next, but someone else sent me an anonymous question, so I'll just go ahead and ask that and then go to Monica. Um, how do you find like-minded support as a layperson quasi-renunciate? It's so countercultural that it's hard to even find others who can remotely relate. It's a tough path to do on your own.
That is a great question. And Kalyanamita, or spiritual friendship, is the foundation of being able to walk the path and being able to cultivate the qualities we need to awaken. So, yeah, we do need to eventually, in some way, find like-minded people. And there are actually a fair number of these quasi-renunciate, I think I like that term, that I'm not exactly sure how to tell you to find them. It's kind of like, how do you find a teacher? You know, somehow there come to be the conditions for that through a certain kind of aspiration that we carry, and then certain kinds of doing actions that seem to point in the direction of our aspiration. For example, um, seeking out teachers that have some of these qualities, monastic teachers who have a fair number of lay students, or lay teachers that have some of these qualities, and then seeing if you can meet some of the other students there, or going on retreats. Long retreats often attract people who have a more renunciate, simple kind of life. And so sometimes you can meet people on retreats who are of the same nature. Um, but it's a little bit individual how that comes about. But I have a lot of faith in creating that aspiration and intention, and then doing actions that are in that neighborhood and letting things unfold.
Yeah,
But it's a good
that's
question.
great, Kim. Thanks. Let's see. Okay. Um, I'm going to drop myself back out. And Monica, you want to ask your question?
Hey Kim, it's so nice to see you.
Hi, Monica. Good to see you again.
Hey. Yeah, I really love your book and I love how rooted it is in Pali. I think it really helps bring the teachings to life, and the nuance that you bring through understanding that is like very aspirational for me. So yeah, that was just a comment. But um, my question is, and this might be, we already kind of touched on it with the conversation with John, but I'm just thinking about my own practice early on and how I misunderstood renunciation completely. Like, it was one of the things that I really did not understand. And so if I were to try to save my future self time, or another student in the future time, I guess that's where my question's coming from is what do you, in your experience having worked with other meditators around this topic more in depth, what do you see like the fundamental misunderstanding is around renunciation? um, is it this attachment to identity view, or is it craving? Is there one thing that you notice that there's a pattern around that could maybe point people in the right direction a little bit sooner? Just
Um,
curious. Your thoughts.
the main thing that counteracts renunciation is some kind of attachment. But I think it has to do mostly with a lack of clarity about our own values. Once we're clear on what's really important, which is also a process that goes through deeper and deeper layers over time, um, it becomes easier to act in line with that, or to let go of what is not in line with those values. So sometimes people haven't done the kind of initial work of figuring out what it is that is drawing them. They don't trust something in the heart or mind that's drawing them toward meditation, toward practice, toward Buddhism, toward Pali. There's sort of a vague sense of, I want to go there, but it's not obvious that they're kind of trusting that attraction and really being willing to value it over other things. So it might be confidence, actually, faith.
That's really interesting of an answer, because yeah, that's just an interesting answer, because I don't think that was my experience. I think it was, I like, especially like in like a Tibetan context, or like a guru devotion type of lineage, where it's like the emphasis is so much faith, and that's kind of how I started. And there was this idealization almost of needing to practice sila from like well, this is what you have to do to be a perfect Buddhist, and you kind of just have to trust, and you have to just do it and grit your teeth. That was the approach that was taught to me. So, and that didn't, and I felt like I was practicing that, but there was still this resistance to the actual renunciation aspect. So I don't know.
Well, that is an external devotion,
Uh-huh.
an external faith, which is used as a vehicle in the Vajrayana practices and very effectively so. So I have a lot of respect for the whole culture of practice that they build around that way of doing it, and it does work. But I would say that in Theravada practice, which has more of the renunciation aspect, what we have trust in is something internal, some kind of a refuge that we create in the heart that isn't necessarily on an external being. Westerners have a very hard time trusting this. Um, we have mostly an issue of uh, self deprecation and these kinds of things. I don't know. It may be that this isn't a direction that totally resonates for you, but I see often that, yeah, kind of a lack of willingness to answer the door when the spiritual knock comes. And we hem and haw and we pick up the phone and we look out the window, but we actually need to just throw open that door and walk through it. And that means letting go of the room that we're in.
Thanks for clarifying. Yeah, that was really helpful. That second portion. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Monica, and thank you, Kim. And the next person who wants to ask a question actually is Chappelle. So, Chappelle, do you want to doing like the Monica and Chappelle show? And to be honest, that's a show that I'd watch. So, do you want to go for it?
Yeah, I'm interested in what you feel, how you feel about relationships and renunciation. Do you find in your own practice that you find relationships less interesting? Maybe spending time with people even. Uh, you know, I guess in my practice, I find that uh, yeah, I feel pretty interested in cultivating more relationships in general. But yeah, I think it goes back to like the time spent uh, and what the value, because seclusion is definitely like something that's important for samadhi. Um, but yeah, like just finding the time.
Well, I find that my relational life has a lot more richness to it as my mind becomes simpler and less sticky, less attached to various things. In that, when I am with another person or people, um, there's less me in the way, and I can truly connect more easily or enjoy their perspective. And um, I find that the relational life actually, in a sense, goes better when the mind is willing to let go of all the distractions that come in, all the things it's trying to formulate what it wants to say while the other person is still speaking. So much easier just to be with someone when the mind is simpler. So I think you'll find your relationships become deeper and richer uh, if the mind takes on letting go in the mental realm, the realm of mental habits, of projections, of views and stories, which is really where the deeper form of renunciation is. And the Buddha says this in the text also. He says, communities that are in harmony are those that have taken on three things: the value of renunciation, of non ill will, and of non cruelty. And he says, I would go to a community that values those three things, and I wouldn't want to go to a community that has turned away from those three things. So it's interesting that renunciation is paired with communal harmony. This is worth contemplating.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you. Do you find that you need like a certain amount of renunciation to have samadhi be like robust? Like, what's the minimum amount of renunciation for
The minimum amount is to let go of the 5 hindrances.
Okay.
But, I mean, that's a glib answer, right? But what are the 5 hindrances? They're things that float through the mind, with little hooks on them. A sensual pleasure floats through the mind, and we say, "Ooh, yeah, donut, that'd be great," something like that. Or, the latest outrage floats through our mind, and we get on that bandwagon and construct a whole view about, ill will towards something. All of these are just ways that we haven't been willing to um, just sit and see the activity of the mind as a passing show in some way. So the hindrances are all ways that we get hooked and are not willing uh, to release them. We choose to go for the hindrances. So that's the renunciation, is not to go for the bait. And then we can enjoy samadhi. It's a trading up of happiness. And it's not that there isn't any pleasure that comes from contemplating things, getting agitated. There is a certain something there for the mind, goes for it, but it's a higher happiness to be in samadhi. So when we're sitting on the cushion, we can try to trade up for that. It's a good question.
Yeah, I could keep going, honestly. But thank you. It was really helpful.
Thanks, Chappelle. And thank you, Kim. So, Kim, I think it would be great to wrap up here. I want to thank you so much for joining us. This was really a pleasure. And I think there was so much value that you provided through your insights and just through the conversation that you had with all of us. So, I guess just anything that you want to say, Kim, before we close for the evening?
Oh, I just want to wish all of you well in your practices. And I love that you're getting together for these kinds of educational and chances to talk with people. May it be a great blessing for you and ripple out to support all beings everywhere. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And to everyone who joined us tonight, thank you for your time, your attention, your practice. I hope this was of benefit to you, and I hope you all have a wonderful evening. Take care, everybody.
Thank
Bye.
you.